Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at another episode here at Tokyo PM. And I kind of wanted to take the opportunity to go back and touch on what is product management. Product management in itself is a relatively new role. It, I think, started gaining prominence in around 2005, and the trajectory for product managers and product management has been growing ever since. Recently, you might have heard the terms like product led growth, and apparently that was only coined in 2016. And more recently, you have a trend of the role of chief product officer being established, CPO, which is a combination of sort of CTO and CEO in terms of what does the product do. So product management is still a relatively new role. Now, Japan, in adopting product management and not only product management, but a product management style of doing work is also so relatively new. But that we're going to touch on a separate video. But today I kind of wanted to explain what my understanding of it is, because I've been a product manager for 3 years now, and it's still a relatively new role, especially here in Japan. And it takes a little bit of an understanding of what is expected of you by your peers. So let's get right into it. So this is a very common diagram for those who are entering product management as a beginner. You are expected to be involved in the tech, involved in the UX, and involved in the business. Now, this is a very broad scope. When we're talking about tech, the expectation could be that you're working directly together with your engineers and you're trying to manage what their Scrum looks like, what they need to deliver on within a 2-week sprint, and then also try to solve technical issues alongside the team is one aspect. Then you look at UX, and it could be ranging all the way from the UX research to the very preliminary understanding of what does your customers do, how do they interact with the platform, and what journey are we trying to take them on. And now lastly is business. And business could be anything from go-to-market strategy, customer distribution strategy, ROI on the investments that you're making as a team into a specific product, and forecasting returns. And so these are sections, or these are teams within a company that have their own establishment. You're not expected to do it all, but what you are expected to do is to work together with these teams, mostly closely with the tech team in current companies, where you would be leading your engineer team to drive development. But that would very much need collaboration with the UX and the business team. And so you kind of sit in the middle of these sort of powerhouses within a company. Now, this in itself, this diagram also assumes a lot, because you have a lot of companies where, let's say, they want to make a new project. So they would pitch the product, find a third-party vendor to make it. They go, great. They make it. They have the working product. And then their main goal is to sell and distribute. And so they're not so involved in the UX and in the tech. So this framework that you see above works more for an agile mindset, where you try to iterate and you try to interact with your customers and you try to adapt the business quite flexibly. But if you're looking at a multi-year time scale, then this assumes that tech and UX have the same weight as business, and that's not always true. So I just wanted to put that out there. A product manager can struggle in an environment where they don't have the space to float between these fields, and when these fields aren't of equal size, because if business is quite large, and it's fair that business is what helps drives the revenue for the company, but it can be challenging when business overpowers the other domains within a company for the product manager to do their job. So you sit in the middle of these three teams, and then it becomes your responsibility to make sure that you're coordinating with your engineers for what you're trying to deliver. The customer journey is clear from the UX perspective. So that's doing user research, user interviews, also designing the interface and designing the onboarding flow and all of that. So UX and tech would work very closely together. And then on the business side, you're saying, why are we making this? Who's it for? What are we targeting? What problem are we trying to solve? And so all of this comes together, and you're the person who sits in the middle. So you're the person that people will go to when they have a question, for example. Now, like I said at the beginning, the product management is still a very new role. But what's been interesting is, now the year is 2023. And we've seen this trend of businesses shift from a sales or distribution focus to a product focus. And the biggest driver of that is these product CEOs. So for example, here you see the CEO of Microsoft was previously the PM at Azure, or the CEO at Yahoo was previously the PM of Google Search, and who had done the associate product manager program. Or the CEO of Adobe used to be the PM of Acrobat, Photoshop, etc. And the head of Instagram used to be the PM of Facebook Newsfeed. So PMs, because they're so involved in many different parts of the companies, there's continuing to be this trend to have product managers rise up and become CEOs, because they need to maintain, or they facilitate a sort of leadership position, even though within the company, while they're PM, they might not necessarily have so much authority on the strategy or on the direction, because they need to work collaboratively, but they take a level of responsibility, and they're the people that, stakeholders would come to ask questions. And also they need to try to provide answers and work collaboratively with the team. And so there's currently a trend of product managers quickly rising through the ranks in terms of leadership position and becoming CEOs. Now, this is not the only career ladder for a product manager. You can also become a great individual contributor rather than a people manager. And in doing so, your main focus is execution, or your main focus is, getting the details right and creating a great product that doesn't require so much sort of CEO level responsibility. And that is also another path. But product manager, it does carry such a weight that we are starting to see this trend of PMs moving into CEO positions. So what does the PM's role in a company look like? Now, this depends on the company. So from the books that I've read, you have some companies that are very top down. So you'll have, for example, let's say the CEO who's responsible for the vision. They would then break out the roadmap. So what is the grand company roadmap? And from the roadmap, they would establish, what releases are they doing? So for example, Apple, they do one big release every year. So they do the WWDC, and they line up a lot of releases for Safari or their other ecosystem applications to have a very big feature drop once a year. They do, of course, small updates along the way, but they try to show off all of their main things in one go. Then you have iteration. So this is how we're improving our processes, how we're improving our sprints. And then lastly, you've got daily. And so a product manager's seniority kind of defines how involved they are in these processes. So when you first get started, you're going to be involved very much in the daily. You're going to be working together with your tech team to understand, what it is that we need to do and what is it that we need to deliver on. And then you're going to start looking at iterating. So you're going to start thinking, okay, well, we've got this 2 week sprint, and this is the product that we're doing. How do we improve the product that we're working on for the customers? And so your role and responsibility will start to branch. But fundamentally, if we're looking at only this vertical, there's different ways that companies approach it. So for example, Microsoft, from my understanding, is very top down. So you'll have someone say, this is the vision, this is the roadmap, this is when we're releasing. Now we'll leave it up to you on how you iterate there, and you need to break it down on the day-to-day. But then you also have other companies where they give the sort of bottom level or entry level product managers a lot of agency to say, hey, this is what we think is important. This is what we work on. This is the direction that we want to go. We're doing this daily. This is how we want to iterate. And so we're going to release on this schedule. And that would then define the roadmap and the vision. So the way that a PM's role in a company works can very much vary depending on the company, because the role is still quite new and the level of responsibility or company culture is quite new. So especially when you're looking at a new company, it's worth asking during the interviews, what does a PM's role look like in a company? The company that I worked at before, it was very top down. And so our responsibilities was, this is the product, this is why we're making it, this is who we're making it for, now go make it. And then it would be our responsibility from there to break it down and say, okay, well, how are we splitting it up? What features are we prioritizing first, et cetera, et cetera. Then the other company that I worked at more recently was our job to say, this is what we want to work on. And so that meant that we had to understand the current problem space. We had to then work together with our stakeholders to create a solution. And in creating a solution, we would then define, okay, in the next 6 months, these are the kind of things that we want to tackle. This is the expected outcome from those. And that would then set a grander 1 year, 2 year vision for you and the team. So it very much depends a PM's role in a company. The task that you do is somewhat similar, but your level of responsibility or your expected level of impact can change depending on company culture. So what does a PM's job look like day to day? So the way that I see it, at least in my level of seniority at the moment, is that we represent the engineers. So you have engineers who I like to think of it as like architects and the construction crew, the people that actually make the building. An architect is kind of worthless when they go, oh, here's a blueprint, but you have no one to make it. And the people that make it, they can go, oh, actually, we shouldn't put the beams there. We should put the beams here because of structural support that maybe the architect missed. And so this is very much a collaboration between the product manager and the engineers on saying, how do we fix the problem that we're facing? And so as the PM, you would work together with the UX and you would work together with your business stakeholders to say, what is the problem that we're trying to tackle? Do I identify a problem during the onboarding flow, or do they say, we want to increase our sort of active user rate and we want to increase our average view duration, for example, if it's a YouTube. So then the question is, how do we do that? How do we take this problem that we're trying to find and what is the solution that we want to look at? So you would discuss this with your engineer team and your engineers would say, okay, well, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do this. And in that discussion, you would be able to establish a set of solutions that are technically feasible, also depending on sort of how much effort's involved, how much time's involved. And you would do this so not only together with the engineers, but UX is also, of course, very involved in the solution. Then once you have that idea, you kind of go back to the business side of the company and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is what direction that we're looking at. And this would be done by creating a product requirement document. So this product requirement document there. So the product requirement document, the purpose of this is it allows everyone to be on the same page. Amazon, for example, they don't do PowerPoints. They don't do meetings to explain things. They make documents. And the benefit with the document is everyone needs to be very clear on what it is. And you can't bullshit with the document. It's very easy to do with PowerPoints and it's very easy to explain things and gloss over numbers, but a document can be picked apart. A document can be challenged. So it's worth creating a document that allows everyone in the team and everyone in the company to be aware of what it is that you're working on, why it is that you're working on it. And this allows you and the UX team and the developers to clarify what is the expected feature and what is it that we're making. Now, after you've got alignment with your team and with when I say team, the engineers and the UX and the business, you go ahead and you make this, right? So you said maybe two sprints, which would be 1 month. Say, okay, well, let's try to develop this. Once it's developed, you run it through QA, you test it along with your QA engineers to say, okay, worked as requested. Now is the problem solved? So this would take a little bit of time. You would have to release the feature and then wait maybe 6 weeks and set a A/B test. So you would set let's say you're trying to improve the onboarding flow by removing an extra field. So then you would say, are we losing customers at the same rate as it was before, which means that 50% of the new onboarding customers, you would not have the field removed as it was before. And then for 50% of the customers, you would have a new field removed. And so you would see what the rate of changes between the two, and maybe was your prediction correct, and have you solved the problem? And the reason you set an A/B test for the short time scales, because if the impact is positive, then you want to roll that out quickly, but you want to set enough time that you can be sure of the results. And so, of course, if you don't have enough users that are onboarding in the same period of time, it's difficult to draw conclusions with a small sample size. So it's your responsibility to look at the feature that's been released and say, hey, it worked. This is a problem that we're trying to solve. This is a solution that we came up with. This is the document that we had. We released it. 6 weeks later, it worked. And so that's a win. And at least from a very entry-level product manager perspective, this is your expectation. You want to look at what the problems are. How do you then find a solution, make sure everyone's on the same page, execute on the solution, and did it work? Did it solve the problem? And this is something that people can skill up on in every step of the way. So let me go to the next slide. So what kind of skills do you need as a product manager? And this is something that I didn't know at the beginning. Personally, my strength is in communication. I very much like communicating. I like working together with teams. We might not always be on the same page, but it's very much a chance for me to coordinate with other teams and have everyone aligned. It's really a role that I enjoy playing with the engineers and also together with this. It's a role I enjoy playing not only by myself, but also with other stakeholders. And in doing so, I can try to coordinate with different team members and feel like I make an impact or I can have an impact on the company direction. And so for me, communication is one of the biggest skills. And that's why, as you can see, it makes up 40%. Now, engineering is also important. Not every company is going to expect this, but for a lot of companies, they expect you at least to be able to facilitate the discussion with the engineers. And so a certain level of technical understanding is vital to be able to communicate with the engineers and make sure that they're not spending all of their time explaining to you how things work. Then you have design. So this is similar to a UX designer. Now, you don't replace the UX designer. So the UX designer will make, the first wireframes. They'll be the ones doing the user research and things like that. But you can at least use your design acumen to try explain, what idea do you have in terms of trying to solve a solution? So solve a problem. Okay. So you can use design to try explain how to solve a problem and use that together with the UX designer to create potential solution that would work for the engineer side, but also for the UX team. And lastly is business acumen, business acumen. So this is when you're working together with a business team. So you're trying to make sure, is this the market that we're going into? Is this the product that we want to make? And does it solve the issue that we're having? And then you're also working together with the marketing team. So there's a role called product marketing manager. And that's saying, you're marketing the role, you're marketing the product, you're marketing the feature to the potential customer. And how does that do? So you'll notice based on the earlier Venn diagram, business, UX, engineer, that's you. You're fundamentally, your main role is communication. And so if you're not comfortable communicating with different teams and sort of meeting these requirements listed here, it can be a difficult role to do. And so that's why PMing is not for everyone. But personally, this is my strength. These I need to work on. But that's what I really enjoy about doing product management. So when you're doing an interview, I kind of wanted to cover this because, a lot of you maybe are new product managers that you want to get into product management. And so you want to try look at, how are they testing your skills? Because like I said, it's very much communication based. And so that makes doing interviews for a new product manager very difficult. So for example, let's look at this case where you might have a question about estimation. So how many Uber drivers in India are there? Well, then you try to show your work to the interviewer on how do you get to that idea. So number of Uber drivers, you think, okay, well, how many people in India are there? Let's say 1.4 billion. And then of those, how many can drive? So that's looking between the age of 18 and 65. So let's say two-thirds. So around 900 million. And then you want to cut it down even more to say, okay, well, probably who's driving and things like that. So you want to break it down and start showing how would you come to a quick estimation. And this is showing your business acumen. Now for number 2, analytics. So this is very much fundamental when you're trying to identify what a problem is and when you're then trying to figure out a solution. Often people use analytics and data and user analytics to be able to understand how users are using your product. And so, for example, in this case, the question might be, what is YouTube's key metric? And this could be anything. It used to be subscribers. So the number one metric for users was subscribers, or sorry, for uploaders was subscribers. But now, for example, it's click-through rate and average view duration. And so they've shifted their key metric from how many people are on the platform in terms of engaging with the posters to how many people click and how many people watch. So how much time are you spending on the platform? And more time spent on the platform means that more advertisements are looking at, more adverts are being shown to the user base. But this could be anything. This could be number of videos watched, so they'd rather have 3 videos watched instead of one long one because that means 3 more advertisements, for example. So analytics, as well as the other questions here, it's kind of vague as to why you would give the answer that you give, but more importantly, you need to be able to justify the answer that you give. Now looking at execution. So for example, a Lyft driver's cancellations up 10%. Why? You don't want to start going straight for this is why. But instead, you want to show the interviewer that you are trying to understand what is the context. So if a Lyft driver cancellations up 10%, why, you want to ask, okay, well, what time of day? What time of the city? Is it based on weather conditions? They cancel after weather conditions. When do they cancel? So do they cancel right after they booked, or do they cancel sort of right before the driver arrives and things like that? So you want to show that you're trying to understand why the cancellations are in the first place. And once you pick apart the problem, then you can come to the solution of, maybe Lyft drivers cancellations are up 10% right before the driver comes in bad weather. Because maybe they took too long, and so then the person instead took a taxi. Design. So design, this is now looking at your UX capacity. So how are you able to prioritize certain things in a design? So for example, let's design a smart shoe. Then you would start with who are we designing it for? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? So you can have a smart shoe that's for an athlete that's very different to a smart shoe that's maybe for elderly customer. So if it's a smart shoe for an elderly customer, you're saying, well, I want GPS tracking. We can have health tracking features such as steps per day. Notice any change in their gait, which can be a sign of any health conditions that they might have. But if you're looking at a smart shoe for an athlete, then you're saying, I want to design the smart shoe to, the entire insole to have a clear pressure sensor so that they can see their stride sort of pattern. And just for someone who's trying to be, let's say, a Olympic runner, the way that they do a run would, the way that their foot would press and spread pressure along their stride could be a very big difference in terms of making, 10 minutes or 20 minutes in terms of a run. So you're trying to figure out what features and what aspects of a smart shoe are important, but don't just run with the question, but you want to show to the interviewer that you understand who you're making the shoe for and what problem are you trying to solve. Now, product strategy, number 5. So this is usually when a company is already established and they want to see what is your projection and your means for long-term vision. So for example, Airbnb, they used to do just hotel bookings and room booking. And so you can say, how would you increase bookings? Well, you can make more bookings available. So you make it from rooms to, actually like bed and breakfast can also do bookings on there. But here you have space with the word bookings. And so what Airbnb has done recently is they've also allowed people to book tours and book experiences on there because Airbnb still gets a cut from those events. And so product strategy would be, how do you increase bookings? You have the space to run and show a little bit more of your creativity. Now, lastly is technical. So this is when you're looking at the technical aspect of your ability. Now, usually these interviews, they're shorter, so you don't have the chance to go through all 6, but it's still worth being a little bit prepared on, what kind of questions would be coming. So if we're looking at number 6, which is technical, how do autonomous cars work? So the level of depth that's expected is something that you can talk about with your interviewer, but you could say, some rely on LiDAR, some rely on infrared true depth cameras, and they use this to interpret the world around them. And then they use machine learning algorithms to identify whether a person is walking or whether they are at a traffic light. And then they use that to communicate with the onboard computer and move the vehicle or brake accordingly. And so these are all examples of the kind of questions that you would get in a product management interview. Now, in terms of job descriptions, so when you're looking at a job description on you want to get a job as a product manager, then you want to see what's expected of you. What are the deliverables that you need to commit on? So are you sort of entry level? Are you running execution with the team, or are you expected to design the roadmap? Or are you expected to also facilitate UX and product design? Because sometimes when they say product designer, product manager, they also put brackets UX because they expect you to work more closely with the UX team than you might expect otherwise. And then secondly, you've got experience. So they would ask, what kind of experience do you have? For example, some startups would say, have you launched an MVP before? Do you know how to define an MVP and what the problem space is and how did it go? Others would say, have you worked on a big product? And if you've iterated, how have you done so? And what impact have you had? And lastly would be stakeholder management. When you're moving up in the product management experience level, you start working with bigger and bigger stakeholders. So rather than working directly with a customer service agent, you might be working with the head of customer service or customer experience. And so showing that you can manage different stakeholders at different seniority levels very much goes a long way. And so you want to read the descriptions and try to keep an eye out for those. Okay, I'm going to skip this because I don't think it necessarily applies. But one example that you would do, personally, I did a bootcamp called Le Wagon. And this is what interested me in product management in the first place. Because in the bootcamp, one of the things that you would do is a project. And so you would spend, I think, 7 weeks learning on how to code and learning on how to do certain aspects. And then in the last 2 weeks, you would work on a project together with your team. And to do the project, we would do all of this. So you'd come up with a design sprint. What does it look like? Very basic UX. Who are we making it for? So what's the user persona? We had one student who they once experienced like a bug on their bed and it freaked out their sister. And so he didn't know if the bug was poisonous or not. And that made the way that they approached the situation very different. So in his case, user persona was someone who was scared of a bug that they can't identify. And so they tried to come up with a feature, which was that they wanted to find a way to identify what bug this is. So when you're looking at a product roadmap, you can say, okay, well, MVP is identify the bug. Next level would be, have a bug catalog, have a bug encyclopedia that we can look at. And so then you're looking at, okay, 3 and 4, what features are we doing and how are we doing them? Which one's more important if we're going to complete the MVP? Then you look at number 5, this is the customer journey. So you're saying, how do they get onto the app? How do they complete the core flow that you're looking at? Which also then ties into number 6. And lastly, number 7, product at retrospective. You made the product, you review it with the team and you see how that goes. And so this was my first experience doing anything product-esque because I didn't know product management was a thing at this time. And it was a really good opportunity for me to get a little bit of understanding that there's this role of the core communicator when you're trying to make a technical product. And that's kind of what opened the doors for me into product management. So I guess the last question I have is PM for you? It's not for everyone. I like it because I enjoy communicating. It does take a bit of being comfortable improvising because you don't always know the truth. You need to work with the assumptions that you have, but also acknowledge that those are your assumptions. And so you're always learning, you're always trying to improve. And so you're very rarely in a position where you can come and going, I'm the expert and I know what's going on. Instead, it requires you to be very humble and very much to work together with your team to say, I don't know what I'm doing, but let's work together. These are the skills that I have in terms of the product management skills that we went through before. But you're the one that's working together with someone who's a lot more experienced in UX, someone who's a lot more experienced in engineering, someone who's much better at business skills and market analysis than you might. And so you kind of work together with the team that you make to then deliver on the best product. So for me, that works because it gives me the great joy of trying to learn from what everyone's doing, but it's not for everyone. So I guess that's kind of my question to you at the end of this PowerPoint today. We covered what the role is of a product manager very fundamentally, what it looks like within a company, whether it's top down or bottom up, and what your role and responsibilities are. kind of what a day-to-day looks like. So, what I would do on a day-to-day when working together with my team. And then we also covered, for those who are trying to get into product management, sort of what the interview roles are and what to see, interview questions are, and also what to look for when you're looking at a CV. And then last thing, I wanted to give an example of kind of how I got into product management going through Levelcom. So let me know in the comments. Is PM for you? And if not, that's okay. And if it is, then great. And please subscribe. Thank you.